Episode 7 of Ahsoka just came out, and this one really is the epitome of the entire season for me. It has a lot of good ideas given the current setup in the show, and the execution is just infuriating. They just throw away all common sense to get where they want, and if the writing was just tweaked to be a little bit better throughout the whole season, the show would probably be pretty good instead of hard to watch, honestly, because it's just so frustrating. So to start off is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. They almost get something right that I mentioned in my previous videos, where I said Hera should be on trial and court-martialed for treason and also taking a child to a war zone. They do set it up here. This is where the episode starts. The whole scene is less than 5 minutes. Obviously, Hera gets justified. We get a completely out of left field cameo, and then they mention Leia. C-3PO shows up and is like, oh, I had this message from Leia, and she had actually approved the mission. The Asian dude on the left, who's the one who's been kind of bitching the whole time and giving Hera a hard time because he's like, we have a government, you need to follow the rules. It gets thrown in his face, even though he's right. I really hate when shows do this, where you're supposed to root for the protagonist just because they're the protagonist, but the person who's portrayed as the antagonist is clearly in the right. And the show doesn't really seem to understand that. And also, I know Leia has a lot of influence because of the rebellion and everything. But once again, I have no clue how the hierarchy works in this universe, because she's still referred to as senator, but her approval for this mission kind of supersedes everyone else who had said no. And I believe that they're also all senators, except for Mon Mothma, who's the chancellor. So again, I don't know how the hierarchy works. We get a completely out of left field C-3PO cameo to exonerate Hera when she was being rightly punished and court-martialed. So this whole scene is only like the first 5 minutes, and we get this little cameo. They make it seem like Hera's right, even though she's not, and then we move on. It's so frustrating because they were right like 90% of the way, and then cut their own knees out from under them. And also, Mon Mothma actually comes up to Hera and says, I know that Leia didn't approve this mission, so how serious is this threat of Thrawn? Objectively. And Hera's like, well, she did, eventually. This is rampant corruption in your new republic, and it just kind of glosses over that fact that people were just superseding the government or going around it for their own personal gain. I mean, this could easily be portrayed as they're the villains in another story. But anyway, I'm just going to move on so we can get to all the more important stuff, since Hera's entire storyline has really been an add-on throughout the whole season. I'm not even sure how much it was really necessary. Like, I know that she put the tracker on the ship and she ended up finding Ahsoka, but all of that stuff could be slightly modified, and Hera's entire part in the story could just be thrown out. So we go to Ahsoka training while they're in hyperspace. I'm fine with her practicing the basic forms. That's in at least the Darth Bane books and stuff that I've read, and they mention it in all the movies and Clone Wars and all that type of stuff. But they are really just milking this Hayden Christensen cameo for everything it's worth. So we get some holograms of him, and Ahsoka says to Hu Yang, he left over 20 of these behind so I could train with him. And this is all fine, whatever. Honestly, it kind of feels like filler just so they can fit Hayden in again and just sort of stretch the episode a little bit longer. And the only thing I will say is that I wish they would just use a body double for Rosario Dawson, because she is so slow with the lightsaber movements. It looks like she's practicing for like a medieval war and carrying 2 long swords, like one in each hand. And she's having a hard time swinging them instead of lightsabers that are supposed to be super fast and smooth. The de-aging still looks good. I'm not sure if that's in part because of the hologram, but just to give you some idea of what I was referring to when I say that she looks really slow with the lightsabers. I mean, besides the fact that you can just watch and see. When you read about it in the Darth Bane books, he does the same thing every morning going through his forms, but he talks about how he's shirtless in the chilly morning weather and he's like drenched in sweat from how much of a workout it is, as opposed to this where she kind of looks like she's like a kid in karate and posing. I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's just one of those things that, like, why not just have her go fast or put someone in who goes fast? So they come out of hyperspace and right into a minefield that Thrawn had them set up at the arrival point, which I like that as far as having Thrawn do the right thing. And it's a pretty cool idea for a scene to have all the Purrgil hitting mines and stuff and Ahsoka kind of trying to outrun them. But the one thing that kind of drives me crazy about this scene is that they set up this minefield and none of the Purrgil die. And like, I get that the Purrgil aren't the goal, Ahsoka is, but I don't know, it just seems like it would have been a much cooler scene if some of the Purrgil had died and you really get how much of a threat these mines are. And instead Ahsoka just kind of bobs up and down. The Purrgil get irritated with the mines and then do like a little short hyperspace jump to get out of the minefield. So yeah, I like the idea for the scene. I just wish they had been a little bit more rough with it as far as killing the Purrgil. But I guess I don't know. It's on Disney Plus. Maybe they don't want to do that. Thrawn sends some fighters after her. She goes to fly through the debris field, which Huyang says is really dangerous. Thrawn says, pull the fighters back. We don't want to waste resources. And this, again, actually makes last episode worse when he's saying we don't want to waste resources. When he literally said last week, I don't care if Ezra and Sabine get stuck here. It's the same as if they're dead. But also send 2 squadrons and the 2 Jedi we just acquired. If you have 2 Force users, even if they're not Master Jedi or full-blown Sith, they're still war assets. Again, this type of thing makes that episode last week actually worse. But anyway, they pull back because he wants to use the witches to get Ahsoka's location and try to blow her out of the sky or force a path that he feels like he's in control of. We go planet side. Ezra and Sabine and all the little Noti are riding around in their campers because they're mobile. And they're just kind of chatting and talking. And again, Sabine has a chance to tell Ezra, like, hey, we've only got 1 rotation left or whatever point they're at now to get to Thrawn because we need hyperspace to get back to our galaxy. And if Thrawn leaves, we don't have it. So they kind of chat. You know, their dynamic's fine. Sabine, I just wish they would let her make one right decision. Like, you know, you want your characters to have flaws and not be perfect, but they also can't make the wrong decision every single time. And at this point in the season, I'm pretty sure Sabine has. At least off the top of my head right now, I can't think of a time in this season that she's made the right decision. So it is a bit frustrating to watch. And there's a little nice joke in there between Ezra and Sabine where she's like, Ahsoka took me on as her apprentice. And Ezra immediately is like, why? Because in theory, she's not a Force user. Of course, we're going to see in about 5 minutes, Ahsoka reaches out to her with the Force. People keep saying that she's not going to be a Force user. Last week, she deflected a blaster rifle into a guy's face. And this week, she's talking through Force communication. And again, she's been fighting Shin, who has the Force. So at this point, I think you can only assume that she's using the Force to some degree. So we move on. We go to Balin and Shin. And Balin essentially says, call Thrawn, tell him you found Ezra, send him the coordinates, and then go kill Ezra and Sabine, and says, take your place in the new Empire. And this is kind of a weird separation. And this, again, could have been a really cool moment if we knew jack shit about either one of these characters. Balin, the way that he's written, the whole season is supposed to be this kind of mysterious, we know he was a Jedi, but he escaped Order 66, and now he's a mercenary. Shin, we're assuming, was a child and came around after Order 66, and Balin took her in because she's a Force user and trained her. And this scene could have had some weight to it if we knew literally anything else. Like, we have no idea what either one of these characters wants. Unless you want to fill in the blanks for the writers, I guess. But they haven't made it clear, at least to me. This is the part where I was saying that Balin's leaving Shin, or at least separating from her, with no explanation. Admiral Thrawn had asked the witches to locate Ahsoka with their witchcraft through the Force. So she's getting shot at in the debris field. And Thrawn knows that she's going to flee to Ezra and Sabine. And then their hope is to kill all 3 at once. No clue why he didn't kill them separately, because obviously they'd be stronger together. But here we are. And this whole part, I'll be honest, I don't really understand because, again, nothing is explained. But Balin and Shin have teamed up with the bandits somehow. And the bandits go after Ezra, Sabine, and the Noti, which are the little hermit crab people. And this whole scene, once again, makes last week even worse. It makes it make way less sense. Because in this fight scene right here, you see the Noti are just like throwing rocks, and they just kind of hide and hunker down. And Sabine is complaining, like, why can't they fight also? And Ezra says they're peaceful people. And she's like, oh, so they're completely defenseless. And they do this thing right here where one of their little camper things gets hit by a stick in the engine, so it goes down, and they all circle up and then just hide. And it makes me wonder, how could Ezra have possibly survived for a decade when he's moving around with a slow group of pacifists, and there's known bandits everywhere, and presumably howlers, which are the dog aliens, and the night troopers who have fighter ships. It just makes completely no sense. And it's actually going to make less sense in about 10 minutes here. And again, why wouldn't Thrawn just go get him? They have fighters. If he wants to kill him, take him prisoner to use him later on, convince him to join his army with promises of a safe return to his galaxy. Whatever the case is, he was half a day away by dog and is roaming around with pacifists and campers. So the fact that Thrawn wouldn't go get him is nonsensical. And I've seen people posting on Facebook and Reddit and stuff that his chainmail or his necklace or whatever is made from Stormtrooper tags. I just don't believe it. And it becomes less believable in the next fight scene, and I'll explain why. Ahsoka flies right to Sabine's location because she reached out to her with the Force, even though their scanners didn't work in the debris field. Balin split off from Shin, so he's waiting for her. They have their little duel. Ahsoka says that she doesn't have the time for this, and Balin says, I know. So they start fighting. And the fight is about the quality of the rest of the season, which is, I would say, lackadaisical. So they have their little duel, and we're kind of cutting back and forth here. This whole scene right here, again, I don't understand. Well, I think I do understand why, and I think it's not for writing reasons. I think they don't want Ezra to overshadow Sabine. I actually mentioned that in one of my earlier videos. I didn't think he would show up until the very end, because then he would kind of overshadow her for fighting with the lightsaber. And here, she's like, take your lightsaber. And he's like, no, I have the Force. So he's been fighting weaponless with a group of pacifists for a decade. Okay. And even this whole thing with him fighting with the Force, but these bandits do have rifles. So I guess that's just where we're at with the Force now, is you're just immune to blaster fire if you have the Force and can stop all the bullets. I know Vader did it in Empire, but he's the strongest. Kylo Ren did it in Force Awakens, but that was one blaster rifle shot that he did that with. So for Ezra to just be fighting weaponless and protecting a horde of pacifists is, again, just nonsensical. And like, I like the idea, at least, of him roaming around, kind of like a guerrilla warfare thing, picking off stormtroopers. But the logic behind it is just so nonsensical. It completely takes me out of the show. We cut back to Ahsoka and Balin. And I don't know if I said this before or not, but she jumped out of her ship with Hu Yang flying again to get here, which is fine. She's a Jedi, whatever. So they fight, and eventually Hu Yang breaks off from the fighters. He escapes somehow because Ahsoka's ship is invincible, and he fires some flak around Ahsoka and Balin. And then she uses that as a diversion to run away. And obviously they both live. So then after this little scuffle, Ahsoka goes and joins Ezra and Sabine in their big fight. The stormtroopers that Shin called in are arriving, and Sabine and Ezra are dueling Shin 2-on-1, even though Ezra has no weapons, which is just beyond belief stupid to me. I don't know how many times Disney is going to have someone without a lightsaber fight someone with a lightsaber and lose. Maybe it can happen if one of them is overwhelmingly strong in the Force. But in this case, you could assume that Ezra is way stronger than Shin, but then 2 minutes later, she throws him like a rag doll. So I don't know what to make of that. And they have done everything they can to make lightsabers something you would buy at Toys R Us and just bop your cousin on the head with. I don't understand why they keep doing this. They've ruined the power level of the lightsabers. At this point, we have Obi-Wan and Ahsoka separately beating Anakin with no lightsabers, Darth Vader toying with Reva with no lightsaber, and Ezra fighting Shin with no lightsaber, just off the top of my head. Why even carry a lightsaber at this point anymore? Because even if you stab someone, they're not going to die anyway. It's infuriating to watch them just undermine powers and how useful lightsabers are and what they mean to Star Wars every single show. And again, Sabine is fighting someone who's a Force user with a lightsaber and holding her own. The two squadrons show up. They all circle up and wait until Shin says fire for some reason, even though they were ordered to kill on sight. And then after she says fire, Ezra's like, wait, maybe we can talk this out. And then she's like, kill them. So they hesitate forever, and this gives Ahsoka time to show up. And I guess this is supposed to be like a comedic beat, but it just makes the stormtroopers even more impotent. Like, when's the last time a stormtrooper killed somebody or hit somebody? I think they did in Obi-Wan. They killed some of the red shirts. Or sorry, Kenobi. They killed some of the red shirts. But it feels like it's few and far between. Especially in this situation when you have one guy with no weapons and one person with a lightsaber and no helmet and Beskar. And you have, I don't know how many are in a squadron, I'm assuming 20, plus a Dark Jedi with you. This fight lasts like 5 minutes. Obviously, Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra just kill a bunch of stormtroopers because they just mow them down because they're cannon fodder now. And I'm actually a little bit surprised. I thought they might have like the smoke thing like Merrick did when they died, but I didn't see it. So I guess they're just regular guys in taped up stormtrooper armor. And Thrawn calls him back, and he's like, this is the one thing that Ahsoka didn't have, time. So then they roll out, and they're just going to go back. Morgan Elsbeth is making this face like, why did we waste resources on this? And that was my exact thought. Like, there was no need to even send them out here. Because, like Thrawn said last episode, I don't care if they get stranded here. Ahsoka's little ship doesn't have hyperspace. And if all he was doing was stalling, then he stalled them for what, 10, 15 minutes out of 3 rotations? So all of this is just action scenes to have action scenes. And when you end your action scene with the main villain saying, yeah, let's just run away, we bought enough time, and the amount of time you bought was an hour if you want to be charitable, really it was probably like 20 minutes. It makes no sense. All they had to do is go back to their ship, load the stuff up, and protect the Chimera. If Ezra, Sabine, and Ahsoka want to camp out with a bunch of hermit crabs, that's the same thing as if they're dead. So this is all just really nonsensical. And that's kind of what I was saying when I was referring to, like, I like the idea of Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine reunited and fighting together and doing their thing. But the fight didn't need to happen, and it makes no sense, which really undermines the stakes. And especially when you know that a stormtrooper is not going to hit anybody. I mean, I would take even just some of the hermit crabs dying, or Ezra getting wounded because he doesn't use a weapon, or just anything. But they just get mowed down for fun and then run. And this is near the end of the episode now, but I just wanted to mention it because I think it's funny that as soon as the fighting is over and the stormtroopers run away, Sabine says, I can't believe you're alive. And Ahsoka says, what, I missed this reunion? And then immediately hugs Ezra. And it's just funny after last week when Sabine was way slower to hug Ezra and they did their weird, awkward small talk first. And it all just felt super uncomfortable to follow it up with Ahsoka, who knew Ezra and trained him, but wasn't nearly as close to him as he is to Sabine. I will say, finally, they're letting Ahsoka emote a little bit, which is nice. This was probably the episode that she was allowed to do the most acting, which, I'll be honest, it still wasn't a ton, but at least she felt like a human, so that was nice. And this is just the ending shot here. Hu Yang got away from the fighters that were chasing him, so Ahsoka has her ship, which, again, you would think if Thrawn was going to prioritize anything, it would be going after her ship, because they're at least a day away from the Chimera by Howler at this point. And we're assuming, we don't really know where anything is. But by ship, I assume it's just a couple minutes. So you would think that he would at least prioritize damaging her ship or destroying it. And that way they could get loaded up and leave them behind. But, you know, they just pull back everything and let them have their little hermit crab camp out. So yeah, this episode for me was, it was fine. The action in this show is just not very good. And it kind of lacks purpose. In the original Star Wars, the movie opens with an action scene. But that's because Darth Vader is killing rebels because he wants the information that Leia has. And he knows that she's on the ship. Or, obviously, the Death Star. They have a very clear goal of blowing up the Death Star before it blows up a planet. Or when Han and Luke go to rescue Leia. They have a very clear goal and it's very purposeful action. In this show, it just kind of feels like the action is there just to have it. And when you don't have the weight of why the action is taking place behind it, it makes it really just flat and kind of monotonous feeling. And that's how this episode felt for me. Like, the hermit crabs are running away, Ahsoka's flying away from the space mines, they fight Shin and Balin, you know that none of them are going to die. Yeah, I think just underwhelming would be my summary of this entire season. And it's a shame because I like all the costumes and the spaceships and the special effects all look good. And they really paid a lot of attention to detail. But it's all just kind of wasted on these really slow lightsaber fights and poorly choreographed and just unnecessary fight scenes. Like the duel between Ahsoka and Balin was just to stall for a couple minutes and then she ran away. The fight with them and the Stormtroopers makes the Stormtroopers again look like cannon fodder and then they run away. And all of it just feels kind of like it's meandering to go nowhere. Which, maybe you're thinking that about this video at this point. I don't know. I went way longer than I meant to, so I'm going to wrap up. One more episode. I guess we'll see how they wrap up. I think it's pretty safe to assume they're going to lose next week and tag along with Thrawn somehow to get back to the main galaxy, and that's where it'll end. But yeah, that's it for me for this one. If you're still here, like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.